In the 1980s, director-producer Ivan Reitman helped alter the way Hollywood was making comedies. He produced Animal House and directed Meatballs, Stripes, and Ghostbusters. His movies that the New York Times calls sweetly cynical comedies that celebrate a kind of wanton rebelliousness are almost always box office hits. The past year's been a busy one for him. After producing the Michael Jordan movie Space Jam and Howard Stern's Private Parts, he directed Father's Day, which stars Billy Crystal and Robin Williams. Joining me now, Ivan Reitman. Welcome, sir. Great to have you here. Now, you've said once, the worst day I ever had directing is better than the best day I ever had producing.
And I'll stick with that.
Okay.
No, there's something so wonderful about working with actors. It's like a privilege, particularly this film, Father's Day, to be able to work with Robin Williams and Billy Crystal.
Is that directing, or is that just saying, shoot?
Well, no, you have to direct. You know, the more creative the performer is, the more that they do, I think the more direction is required, because there's this extraordinary range of things that both occur on the set or are possible. And, you know, the director's job to try to focus it so that it makes sense in one movie.
You've never wanted to do something that was not light and not comedy?
It hasn't come up yet. You know, certain films like Dave, I guess, is a slightly more serious film, but it's still played for humor, and I guess its messages are a little more serious. I seem to have always looked at the world with a comic eyeglass, and so even if I'm dealing with a serious subject, then, you know, in Father's Day, it's a runaway child and the question of fatherhood. It's really looked at from the most humorous side of it.
What do you learn from other directors, movies you see made? What informs what you do?
Life. Sounds so big, but it's trying to keep my eyes open in terms of what goes on in human interaction, particularly in a comedy. You know, the best comedy comes out of sort of real situations which are slightly exaggerated, or where you skew things in just that way that we're reminded of the comedy of life. And so I'm, you know, a lot of times my wife Genevieve says, "Hey, Ivan, will you pay attention to what's going on here?" Because she can tell that I'm zoning out somewhere, and what I'm really doing is really focusing a little outside of what's happening, and just watching instead of participating. And I think...
And looking at it as material.
Just learning from it, you know, and then what happens as I start to work, I work on the screenplays of all my films, and I'm always trying to find that thing, you know.
What's that thing?
That thing that makes the scene more delicious. You know, there's the plot requirement, there's the character requirements, the story requirements, but you have that in a drama. Now, what makes comedy so damn tough is that on top of that, you have to think of that thing that twists it a little bit so that the audience on a very regular basis is chuckling or laughing, hopefully. Mm. And that's a tremendous pressure, both on the performers and particularly on the director.
Howard Stern's movie, Private Parts. Stern was here. I've known him for a long time.
Right.
And we talked about you and the movie, and, you know, and I asked him, I said to him, well, what's the, is this your movie or is this Ivan Reitman's movie? And he said, well, it was sort of half and half. What did you bring to that film? And when you look at it today and the public response to it, would you do anything different?
Well, I'm really proud of the film. I think it's a terrific biography, really, of Howard, and a terrific comedy as well. I started listening to Howard Stern 5 years ago when he started broadcasting in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I became a fan. He was just very unusual. He sort of spoke the truth. Yeah, he said things that sort of annoyed me and was shocking, and I still occasionally turn off in the middle of some bit that he's doing. But on a very consistent day-by-day basis, he was funny, and that's very rare, particularly on radio. So I called him up about 6 months after I was listening and said, you know, you ought to be in pictures. And he was so happy to hear from anyone in Hollywood. He said, can you come down and talk to me? I met him in New York, and, you know, I suggested to him that that his first film he should play himself, that it should be realistically based, very, you know, naturalistically told. And he sort of took it all in, and then we didn't see each other for a year, and he calls me up after about a year and he says, "I've got a great idea for my film." I said, "What's that?" And he says, "The Adventures of Fart Man." And I said, "I don't think that's what I have in mind." And
why would he say that? Why would he think that's good?
I have no idea. I tried to talk him out of it immediately. He went on to, he made a deal with some studio, I think New Line Cinema, and then fortunately he did that thing on MTV, that was quite controversial, right. And I guess had its intended...
Was this pay TV or MTV?
No, this is MTV. MTV. It was a part of their music awards.
Right.
And that's about as much as that idea could stand, and it sort of died away. Then he wrote Private Parts, the book, and I called him up right after, and I said, "Now that's it.
That's a movie.
That's the movie you can do. That's really about yourself. You're speaking very honestly, and I think that's what you ought to do." And I think I got involved about 2 years ago with Len Bloom, developed that screenplay that I think works. And I'm very happy about how the audience responded. The audience that actually came into a movie theater and saw it loved it. And, he kept bragging on his radio show about the test scores, and it was true. I mean, it really...
He used to say on his radio show that it did better than Forrest Gump tested.
Yeah, I don't know if it did better than Forrest Gump, but it did extremely, extremely well at the high end of the...
Then why did it seem to lose its momentum so quickly?
What we kept finding out, what Paramount kept finding out in their marketing surveys prior to opening was there was a third of the audience that was quite curious to see this movie, a third of the audience was neutral, and a third of the audience wouldn't see it no matter what.
You couldn't pay them to go
That's
see
right.
it. Yeah.
They didn't care how good it was.
Yeah.
They were just not, they had a thing about him or what they thought he was. And I think that negativity was far greater than anyone expected. And I think, the film did very well. I think it's going to end up doing about $45 million in box office over here. And it'll be interesting to see how it does in Europe where they don't know him at all. It could do better in Europe where they don't know him at all than it does here because the focus will be on the movie, which is very strong. And there's no negativity. There's no positive, there's no negative.
But the negativity is the same thing that happened to People versus Larry Flint. There was a reaction to Larry Flint that hurt that movie, yes?
Yes.
Same thing.
And another excellent movie that I think, people sort of confuse the subject matter sometimes with, the intent of the filmmaker.
If you had it to do over, some have made this argument, you didn't get, there was not enough of what makes him popular on the radio in the movie. Second guessing.
Yes, I've heard that argument. I think the movie is plenty raunchy. It's much raunchier than most movies that are out there. But the film is also sweet and funny and very human. I mean, it's a realistically based biography. I stand by that approach for him. I think in the long run will do him an amazing amount of good. I mean, already his audience numbers are up. They've added about 5 new stations in the last month, and
Does
I think
he
that's
have
going
a
to
future
continue.
in movies?
Oh yeah, I think he's really good in it. I think the big question for him will be, will he translate to the widest possible audience, or is it going to be sort of focused down to his radio audience? And the fact is, the radio audience is getting larger for him, and it's getting larger as more people discover him, what he really is, as opposed to what their perception of him is. And he is a very intelligent, very, very funny performer that does push the envelope.
Of all the movies you've made, what was the most challenging and the most satisfying?
I talked about Dave earlier. That was very satisfying. There was a way that movie came together that I'm very proud of. I think I get a lot of people telling me now that that's, although it's by far not my most successful film, from a box office standpoint, it seems to be a film that, has sort of touched people in a special way in terms of their, desires about government and what they would like in a leader. And it is a fairy tale, but it's a sort of a very realistically based fairy tale.
Ghostbusters, I assume, is the most successful.
Yes, Ghostbusters, and now, Space Jam is the film that I produced this last year is also very, very successful. And
Michael Jordan has a future in movies?
I think so. I mean, again, it was interesting because I worked with a lot of sort of non-technically professional actors in both these films, in the Stern film and in the Michael Jordan movie. But they were both, they're great personalities, and they jump off the screen because of what makes them those great personalities. And Michael Jordan is, he's got this great voice, he's got great communicative eyes, smart, and I think he could do things that don't involve basketball. I don't know if he wants to do that, but it's a possibility. And Howard Stern is what I said. He's funny, and the intelligence comes through as well.
When you look at the way the movie business is going, what do you like and don't like about it? Everybody talked about this year and all those films that were produced by or distributed by Miramax and the rise of the independents. And there was only one film, which was a studio film, that got nominated to any degree, and that was Jerry Maguire.
Yeah. I think, movies are costing way too much. And, Space Jam cost a lot of money. Father's Day ended up costing a fair amount of money.
How much? Father's Day.
Father's Day is in the 60s, which now is actually a relatively modest amount.
Compared to Titanic, it's a small film.
That's right, it's tiny. But it's still, when I think that, Animal House cost $3 million. Actually, Meatballs, if I go back to my first movie, cost $1.5 million.
Animal House made what? 50?
50, no, more than that. I think about 70 or 80 million box office domestically, and then sort of went on forever as a sort of a perennial video favorite. But even Stripes cost $10 million. Ghostbusters was a very complex movie, cost $31 million. And so it's very frightening. Really, it's not just that it costs a lot and it's scary, but the cost of films have forced the studios to work in a certain kind of way.
Father's Day. You got Robin Williams. You got a huge step forward going in.
Well, and I've always wanted to work with Robin, and we've sort of come close a number of times, and with Billy Crystal.
And how does it differ from what you anticipated working with Robin Williams?
I didn't realize how good an actor he is. You see the movies, and what you do is you're touched by the comedy of it, and just by the humor, and you don't notice just how skillful. And I have to say this about Billy as well. He was really a spectacular actor, and just that I could count on both of them to deal with things that are not about the comedy, but are about sort of dealing with this sort of underlying story in a sort of very effective, dramatic way, was a surprise. And I think, I like to say they're like two great jazz musicians. They've never been in a movie together. This is the first time. They do the comedy relief for a number of years, have been good friends for a long time, have always wanted to do a film, and have never found one. And so this was kind of a really nice a possibility. And what happens with them is that, like great jazz musicians, there's a lot of this, okay, I'm going to play the tune, now you play the tune, and there's a lot of this kind of trading off. It's very musical, actually, and there's also a lot of competition. Yeah. It's not, they know how to fill a lot of times it's so wonderful to watch because I like to do multiple takes. A lot of times I don't stop the camera because what I found with comedy especially is that people get into a rhythm, and you want to sort of maintain that rhythm as long as you can.
It's interesting we say that because Mike Nichols worked with Robin and Nathan Lane.
Yes.
And the stories that were around were that stuff that was left on the cutting room floor after he let the scene roll.
Yes.
Was extraordinary and hilarious. Not better, but just really wonderful.
Yes.
He chose not to use some of it, even though it was very good, because he thought somehow it wasn't where the movie was.
Yes. Well, I think that's true in probably all comedies, but particularly working with Robin and Billy together, who are so comfortable with each other. Yeah, I think I could have cut 3 different versions of this film.
That's the point. Yeah.
And the movie does tell you where it wants to be. And I found myself sort of shifting the editing quite a lot in the process as I watched the rhythms of it, and I watched it with audiences. And, you know, the movie now is exactly where I want it to be and where it wants to be.
You mentioned audiences and where they go. Do you get lots of benefit from testing movies? Do they tell you, inform you?
They inform you if it's really funny, as opposed to, in a comedy you have to play for an audience, because yes, you have to know. I think if it was a straight dramatic piece, I would just trust my own feeling about something. Yes, this has to be like this, and this is the way the story is best told, and you just finish it off. And it's kind of nice to play just to see if there's any surprises. A lot of times, you know, you've been working on normally you work on a movie for a couple of years. You've heard, in the writing, you've heard the line 50 to 1,000 times. In the shooting, you've heard it 1,000 times. In the editing, you've heard it 5,000 times. By the time you're looking at the movie like this all by yourself in your little editing room with your editors who've also watched the same line 10,000 times, all comedy ceases. You just have a sense of, this seems like it's funny.
Yeah.
And, you know, I try to use this instinct in the back of my mind to judge what's humorous on the set, because, again, it's repeated and repeated, and it's certainly not what the crew thinks is funny. That's when it's really nice to sort of try it in front of some fresh people.
I mean, I find myself sometimes when you're editing something in even more documentary form or about somebody, biographical, you'll find out that, you know, let's try it this way, and then let's try it this way. Maybe if we moved it here, and all of a sudden you're back where you started. You know,
it happens. It certainly has happened to me quite a few times.
Ivan Reitman, the movie is Father's Day. Thank you very much. Great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow night.